Louisiana's coastline was disappearing. An invasive swarm of 20 million giant rodents was eating the marshland from the roots up. The state was losing a football field of wetlands every single hour. And the proposed solution? Partner with commercial hunters, private landowners, and the luxury fashion industry to breed millions of one of the deadliest predators on the continent. Not protect them behind fences, not lock them in federal reserves. Breed them, sell their skins, and unleash them into the swamp. The National Audubon Society opposed it. Defenders of wildlife condemned it. The Fund for Animals called the government's own science unbelievable and unchecked. Wayne King, curator of herpetology at the New York Zoological Society, publicly dismissed Louisiana's population surveys as scientifically insufficient. But within 25 years, every one of those critics went quiet. Today, over 3 million American alligators patrol the Gulf Coast. The program has generated nearly $1 billion, and the marsh that was being swallowed whole has begun to stabilize. But that outcome started with 13 animals, a deliberate lie, and the worst ecological gamble in American history. 13 animals, released from a single pen on a private island in 1937. Within 2 decades, they'd multiplied to 20 million and begun the systematic destruction of America's most valuable coastline. The animal was the nutria, a semi-aquatic rodent native to South America, weighing up to 16 pounds with webbed hind feet, a rat-like tail, and inch-long, bright orange incisors. The man who brought them to Louisiana was Edward Avery McIlhenny, Monsieur Ned, the eccentric heir to the Tabasco pepper sauce fortune. McIlhenny was a genuine conservationist. He'd saved the snowy egret from extinction on his Avery Island estate. But he was also a businessman, and he saw nutria fur as the next big commodity. The Federal Bureau of Biological Survey warned him about the invasive risk. He ignored them. He imported the rodents, bred them, and then deliberately released them into the wild to establish a new fur industry. For decades, a convenient myth circulated through National Geographic, Audubon, and the Washington Post that the nutria had simply escaped during a hurricane. McIlhenny's own private business archives tell a far more damning story. The consequence of that decision unfolded at terrifying speed. Nutria reach sexual maturity at 6 months. They breed year-round, and every female produces 4 to 5 offspring per litter, multiple times a year. But it wasn't the breeding that made them catastrophic. It was how they ate. Unlike native muskrats, nutria don't graze the tops of marsh plants. They dig down and devour the root mats, the dense, fibrous networks that physically hold wetland soil together. When those roots are destroyed, the soil disintegrates. Tides wash it away, saltwater floods in, vegetated marsh converts to open water. Permanently. Biologists call this an eat-out, the ecological equivalent of ripping the foundation from beneath a building. By the late 1950s, Louisiana was losing between 25 and 35 square miles of coastline every year, a landmass the size of New Orleans vanishing every 7 years. And while the rodents multiplied, the one native predator capable of controlling them was being hunted to the edge of extinction. The American alligator, apex predator of the Gulf Coast, had been decimated by decades of unregulated leather poaching. Populations had crashed below 100,000. The marshland had lost both its anchor and its enforcer simultaneously. For a brief window, the international fur trade provided accidental relief. During the 1960s and 70s, trappers harvested over 1 million nutria annually, holding populations just below catastrophic levels. But when the global fur market collapsed in the 1980s, destroyed by anti-fur activism, European overproduction, and shifting fashion trends, the annual harvest plummeted from 1.2 million to fewer than 30,000. The nutria population immediately rebounded. Over 100,000 acres of marsh were completely denuded. That's when 2 field biologists at a remote wildlife refuge proposed the solution that every major conservation organization in the country would spend years trying to kill: turn the endangered alligator into a commercial commodity and flood the marshes with millions of them. In 1962, the Louisiana Department of Wildlife and Fisheries did something unprecedented. They shut down all alligator hunting across the state. No exceptions, no seasons, total closure. The architects of this moratorium were Ted Joanen and Larry McNease. two field biologists stationed at the Rockefeller Wildlife Refuge in Grand Chenier, hundreds of miles from the conservation offices condemning their work. Joanen and McNease weren't theorists. They spent their careers waist-deep in the marsh capturing alligators, fitting them with color-coded radio collar transmitters, and tracking their movements through directional receivers. Female alligators, the reproductive engine of the species, retreat deep into interior marshes during late summer to build nests and guard their eggs. Males and juveniles stay in the open canals and deeper waterways. The two populations naturally segregate by habitat. Joanen and McNease realized that if a hunting season was timed precisely, restricted to September, limited to accessible waterways, the harvest would overwhelmingly target males while leaving the breeding females untouched. In 1972, they tested the theory. 61 hunters were issued tags in Cameron Parish for a 13-day experimental season. The results confirmed their model with surgical precision. 80.29% of the harvested animals were male. The breeding population remained effectively untouched, but harvesting adults wasn't the revolution. The true breakthrough came in 1986 with the egg ranching program. In the wild, 83% of alligator hatchlings die before reaching 4 feet in length. Raccoons eat the eggs, floods drown the nests, adults cannibalize the young. An enormous natural bottleneck. Joanen and McNease proposed bypassing it entirely. Licensed farmers could collect viable eggs from wild nests, incubate them in temperature-controlled facilities, and raise the hatchlings in captivity. The alligators grew faster. They survived at dramatically higher rates. A discovery by Joanen and researcher Mark Ferguson revealed that incubation temperature determines the sex of the hatchlings, giving farmers precise control over their stock. Here was the non-negotiable condition. Every farmer had to return a percentage of healthy juveniles to the exact marsh where the eggs were originally collected. Initially, 17%. Later reduced to 12% as wild populations saturated. Every returned animal was measured, sexed, tail-notched, and tagged. Not a single juvenile entered the wild untracked. The brilliance of this model went far beyond biology. Landowners had previously viewed the reptiles as dangerous pests and routinely let poachers clear them out. But the moment an alligator became a valuable cash crop worth real, consistent money through legal skin and meat sales, those same landowners had a powerful financial reason to protect both the animal and the wetland habitat it required. The very market that had nearly driven the alligator to extinction was now funding its recovery. But the commercial value was only half the equation. What was happening beneath the surface of the water would prove far more significant. In 1987, the American alligator was officially removed from the endangered species list. A species hovering on the brink of extinction 25 years earlier was declared fully recovered. Then, the ecological effects started compounding. As alligators grew past 5 feet in length, their diet shifted dramatically. Juveniles eat insects, crustaceans, and small fish, but full-sized adults target mammalian prey. And in the marshes of southeastern Louisiana, that meant nutria. Stomach content analyses revealed that nutria comprised up to 60% of the total dietary weight of large alligators. The predation was density-dependent. The more abundant the rodents, the more heavily the alligators targeted them. 3 million apex predators exerting constant, round-the-clock pressure across millions of acres of marsh. No bounty payments required, no fashion trends to sustain, no human labor to maintain. A self-replicating biological control system operating every hour of every day. Combined with the Coastwide Nutria Control Program, a state-funded bounty of $6 per nutria tail, launched in 2002, the dual pressure proved devastating to the invasive population. Annual nutria removal reached 400,000 per season. Documented marsh damage dropped from 100,000 denuded acres to roughly 16,000 by 2018. But the alligators weren't just eating the problem. They were physically rebuilding the landscape. Using their broad snouts, claws, and powerful tails, alligators excavate deep depressions in the marsh substrate, sometimes down to limestone bedrock. These ponds, known as alligator holes, function as critical infrastructure. During the dry season, when surrounding water levels drop, the holes retain deep water. They become the only surviving aquatic habitat for miles, lifeboats for fish, amphibians, turtles, and wading birds. Without them, the aquatic food web would collapse during seasonal droughts. The alligators maintain these holes continuously, clearing encroaching vegetation and cycling nutrients into the surrounding soil. Then, in 2024, researchers uncovered something nobody had anticipated. An analysis of 649 soil core samples from the Smithsonian's Coastal Carbon Network revealed that wetlands store significantly more carbon when alligators are present, an additional 0.16 grams per square centimeter across their native range, rising to 0.2 grams in mangrove forests. By suppressing herbivores and allowing vegetation to grow uninterrupted, the predators were measurably increasing the carbon sequestration capacity of the entire American coastline, a function no one had predicted and no conservation budget had ever accounted for. The economic transformation was equally staggering. Over the program's history, more than 11 million wild eggs were collected. Over 7 million farm-raised alligators entered commerce. Cumulative revenues exceeded $988 million, all while delivering free coastal, storm surge protection, nursery habitat for commercial fisheries, and billions in uncounted ecosystem services. So if the model works this well, why hasn't the rest of the world simply replicated it? Some tried, most failed. And the failures reveal exactly why this approach demands precision. In 1958, Louisiana itself attempted a crude prototype, declaring the nutria an outlaw quadruped and placing a 25-cent bounty on everyone killed. The legislature never funded it. Not a single cent was appropriated. Trappers shrugged and walked away. The population kept exploding. In the United Kingdom, authorities hired professional trappers to eradicate feral nutria from the Norfolk Broads. They removed 97,000 animals. But without a native apex predator to maintain pressure, the approach required continuous, expensive human intervention that no budget could sustain indefinitely. The starkest warning comes from the Florida Everglades. Alligators there play the exact same ecological role, maintaining holes, anchoring the food web. But a different invasive species has created a biological deadlock. Burmese pythons released through the exotic pet trade have caused raccoon populations to drop by 99.3% and opossums by 98.9%. Rabbits and foxes have effectively vanished. Unlike nutria, pythons can consume adult alligators. The alligators eat pythons too. Neither species can suppress the other. The biological control mechanism is locked in permanent stalemate, proof that native predators have absolute limits. Louisiana's model succeeded because of a precise alignment, a native predator already evolutionarily adapted to consume the specific invader, combined with an economic framework that made habitat preservation profitable for private landowners. Remove either element, and the system collapses. Even Louisiana's success now faces an escalating new threat. Feral hogs, illegally released by sport hunters, have invaded the Gulf Coast marshes and discovered a high-protein food source: alligator eggs. A 2011 survey found that over half of Louisiana's alligator farmers had suffered nest destruction from feral swine. 590 nests destroyed in a single season, compared to 7 in the 3 prior surveys combined. 95% of affected farmers reported the damage was increasing. Game camera data from Texas confirmed the scale. Roughly half of all monitored nests were predated by hogs. The living engine that stabilized the coast is now under attack at its most vulnerable point, its reproductive cycle. The financial comparison makes the stakes undeniable. Mechanical coastal restoration, dredging, sediment diversions, engineered barriers costs billions of taxpayer dollars. The Alligator program generates over $100 million annually while providing free coastal defense, active nutrient cycling, and measurable carbon storage. The predator, that was nearly hunted to extinction, now generates revenue while performing a job that would cost billions to replicate with concrete and steel. The deepest paradox of this entire story is that the commercial killing of an endangered species became the very mechanism that saved it and the coastline it inhabits. The predator, that was nearly erased for its skin, now anchors a billion-dollar industry that funds the preservation of the wetlands it calls home. Should more conservation programs embrace commercial harvesting to drive species recovery, or does commodifying a wild animal always carry too much risk? The debate is far from settled. Drop your position in the comments. And if stories where ecosystems fight back through methods nobody saw coming deserve more of your time, subscribe. There is no shortage of them.